Welcome to Adventures in Education, a program that spotlights positive things happening in the world of education in Southern Oregon and Northern California. I'm your host, John Letts, and I have a very special guest today, Chistopher Lucas. Then, Chistopher, this is kind of a homecoming for you, as I understand. You've been active in this area. I should mention that Chris is a filmmaker and is now part of the faculty at Southern Oregon University.
That's right.
What else can you tell us about your background here?
Well, I did live in the area very briefly in the early 90s. I was raised in Washington State. After college, I came down here and worked at KOBI Television for a while. I can't remember quite how long, maybe 18 months or so, working in news production. And then I moved on to work in industrial film production and independent film and moved back to Seattle.
So very much from the Northwest at any rate. And
yeah.
I imagine you're, the air quality aside, we are videotaping this in one of the worst air days of the year here in Southern Oregon.
I'm glad to be in a nice air-conditioned studio, I'll say that much.
Yes, we appreciate that. No smoke in here. Yeah. But I'm sure apart from that, you're probably glad to be back in the area.
I am. I have family that live in the valley here, so I would vacation here on a pretty regular basis. I know the area really well. I knew there's quite a bit of creative energy in the region, and there's some really interesting filmmaking going on. So I had moved to Texas to work, to be in graduate school, but also do film work. So I lived there for many years, and so came back here. Great to be back near my family, and really glad to be working at SOU as an instructor.
I'm an alumnus from SOU, and I know that we have a beautiful campus here, and it's one of the real treasures of this area.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I love, before we get more into the filmmaking, I love the fact that in my experience, the professors, the instructors were very reachable, very easy to, got to know a lot of them, through the time I was there.
No, that's really the virtue of a school this size, is that you have the ability, if you want to, right, to really reach out to your professors and develop these mentorship relationships. They have, depending on their department and so forth, they have sort of the time and the focus on teaching that a larger university may not give its faculty. So that's really a value here.
Yeah, and I can definitely see, and as I said, I've benefited from that. Well, let's talk a little bit about your filmmaking. Now, I was very impressed by one of the films that you produced. You were the producer on, and it's part of a series apparently called Postcards from Climate Change.
That's right. Funded by Greenpeace and kind of organized by them for an online series.
Well, I thought this is very powerful, so I'm going to let my director know that we're about to roll one of those film clips. And this one shows the entire postcard, and this was my first. When we finish it, we have a lot to relate this to with what's going on in September of 2017. But for now, let's go ahead and roll that film clip, and we'll come back after that.
Great.
Galveston is an island off the coast of Texas. We're set aside from the rest of the world. Yeah, I'm a BOI. I got one of the biggest BOIs around, It means exactly that, born on the island. My mother was born in New Orleans. My father was born in St. Martinsville. They moved to Galveston in 1937 because Galveston was a place where African Americans could make a better living. The wharf paid more than the average job that African Americans could get in 1937, and my father began to work as a longshoreman.
I haven't been to this place since Ike hit, so it brings back a lot of memories. My very first drag show was here. one of the drag queens. She goes by Stick Pin, but she had did a song called Cleanup Woman. And she said, hey girl, I need somebody to back me up. So I came out in a long robe with the broom and the little duster and stuff. And I've always wanted to be on stage, you know. That was my very first drag show. When the Eye of Ike had came, it was like 15 minutes of just quiet, still. We're able to look in the sky, we seen the moon. And then I looked down over our balcony, our porch, the water was right there. 12, 13 feet high.
How great is our God. During Hurricane Ike, we all came together. That was a devastating time for me. I came back and found out that my house had burned down to the ground. That made me really sad because I had all my photos, my toys, my videos. Everything that I had was inside the house and it burned down to the ground.
That's where the water was, right here. So I'm standing there, looking over, holding the banister like, if I fall over this banister, I'm dead. And when I seen the water up here, I said the whole island was just, I figured there was no more Galveston. Right after the hurricane, everybody got together and they bonded and they were asking, do you need help? Do you need somewhere to stay? And there was a bond with everybody, you know. Everybody came together, all races, creed, backgrounds came together, you know. People with money, people without money. We're all equal then.
Let the spirit of justice rule and reign over the community of Galveston. Transform our community into a place where the weak are protected and none go hungry and the poor are taken care of.
When Hurricane Ike hit this island, at that point, we all were even. We all were equal. The powers that be, after rebuilding, you see that you haven't moved and they've gone on and on to mature. African Americans and minorities are always going to feel the brunt of no matter what it is. We still don't have public housing back. There are still African Americans who haven't had their homes repaired.
If the public housing was still here, you'll have kids playing, you'll hear people playing their music in their apartments, you'll see people. Of course you don't see it right now because it's empty, but it's just totally different. It's totally different.
100 years from now, Galveston Island may not be here. In 1967, our beaches was almost a block away from the water. Our beaches now are less than a block.
You know there's a problem. Because I've seen the difference in these caliber of storms. You know, when I was 6 years old to now.
Climate change, when I was younger, I didn't really pay attention to climate change. But after the hurricane, it definitely, I was kind of like, you know, this could happen at any moment. We have to take care of this country. I said this country. Forget this country. We need to take care of this world.
We must realize that there is one race of people on the earth, and that is the human race. This is my dream to come true. Thank you. You hear scientists talk about like global warming is gonna happen and stuff like that, and you don't believe it at first until you actually see something of it. And I'm just worried for my generation coming up because we only have God knows how much time left on here. And with everything that's going on, I don't want the earth to be in danger.
You're watching Adventures in Education, and the video you just saw was produced by my guest, Chistopher Lucas. Boy, I tell you, this clip brings up a lot, especially as we're looking at the devastation from Hurricane Harvey in that area. This couldn't have been a cakewalk for Galveston either.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends in Galveston, and we were watching closely. I feel like they seem to have avoided the real brunt of a lot of this. Of course, the hurricane made landfall a little south.
South of there, yeah.
They were still flooded. They had, a lot of those pictures with the water up into the stores of the Strand there, which is that main drag of stores in downtown Galveston. But the real destruction, thankfully, sort of missed them as Harvey went up and around, right up toward Houston.
Now, I have a little bit of history, as I was telling you before, actually very much history, because there used to be an immigration station at Galveston Island.
That's right.
And that's where my family came over to the United States on my dad's side. And they settled
Island
in
of the South a little bit there, right?
Well, yeah, very much. And they settled in Texas. And a lot of them are still in the Houston area. One of my cousins found 4 feet of water in his house.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So
Everybody's okay.
Yeah, and everyone's okay. That's the really important thing. But it's kind of interesting. Going back to the video clip we saw, that's the first question: is, well, at least we got out. We're
right.
we're okay. But over time, it becomes a real struggle to overcome that. I don't think people really realize that in the beginning days. They're just so glad to be alive, and whole. Now, one of the themes in this, and I think this was said like 3 times in there, which I thought was very touching to me, and that's that you had the fellow that you started with. It was the storyteller, I would say, or at least one of the main people. And he related to that time when all this destruction happened, and for that moment, for those days, everyone was equal. As he said, rich people, poor people, black people, white people, Mexican people, didn't matter.
Right. That
they all saw themselves in the same boat. But here's the twist, the tragedy, is that it just doesn't stay that way. He talks about, well, they went on,
Right. Yeah, I mean, you see, a few days ago I was listening to a podcast, and one of the commenters there was talking about Houston and made a really, I think, fantastic, tragic, but well-made point that we seem to be really very open and skilled at what we might think of as crisis empathy, right? Like when we're in a crisis, we all do pull together and we come to each other's aid. We're all feeling a little bit helpless maybe, and so we want to clump together. Then in the days that follow, and then things get complicated, and there's aid money at stake. Everybody goes back to their homes and realizes the extent of the damage, which varies from place to place. One of the realities of a place like Galveston and Houston is that not every part of town is equally susceptible to these tragedies, right?
Yeah.
There's in historically black neighborhoods, or Houston's a very diverse town, so there's Vietnamese communities and there's Hispanic communities, and within Houston, many of the lower income areas, of course, tend to have people of color predominantly. So there's definitely this disparity in the damage that can be wrought. Harvey was kind of interesting because it was such a destructive storm that I think it's a much more widespread kind of destruction, which will probably keep these questions in the front of our minds for a long time to come. And it's not just about the destruction of the house, so people having water in their house, which I think that's almost it's a
death sentence for the house.
It is, right? And people, it sounds sort of tame to just say, well, there's water in my house, but it renders the house unusable, and especially down in the south, as you know, there's problems with mold and other kinds of things that can get in there. So you really have to be careful. And so these are houses that are going to have to be completely redone.
And I'm hearing the figure of over 100,000 I mean, it boggles the
Yeah,
mind to
yeah,
think.
that's the lower end of the estimates I've heard. And if you put that up next to the fact that Houston is just loaded with, especially on the outskirts, right? These fossil fuel industries and chemical plants, some of which, of course, are still apparently exploding and causing havoc.
That was a surprise
Yeah.
no one was looking for. Right?
Yeah, but this has been a problem for a long time in Houston. There are dozens of Superfund sites around Houston, all the way over to New Orleans, and those are poisons, right, that are circulating even wider now that they've come into these floods.
Yeah. I know every year I take a train trip with my family down to be with family in Louisiana, and we go through Houston. We take that southern route. We go through El Paso, and then we also go continue on through Houston. And I'm just struck every year how the city keeps moving out west.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we'd go visit relatives, and there was the circle, the loop.
Yeah.
Well, that was the freeway. Well, then there's a Highway 8 loop that goes around, and then now there's another loop going around it. It's like you can imagine it just, someday meeting San Antonio. The way it just keeps moving out.
Yeah,
So it's a very spread out city.
It's one of those experiences where you're driving for a long time, and then you see, oh, there's the city. We're coming to the city. And then you keep on driving, right, for hours before you actually get to the center of the city.
Right.
Yeah, Houston is, there's been a lot of discussion recently about the lack of zoning, right, in Houston. It's a very, let's say, free-form city that allows building, really privileges the developers. So there's some willy-nilly development of sort of commercial next to residential, but also probably not as much attention paid to these sort of flood problems as they should have. And hopefully that's going to become part of the larger discussion as well, because we need rules around development.
And here we go. I've seen Houston the same way. I've contrasted it with Dallas, which has much more of a planning structure. But the thing with the, with Houston, it not only is it spread out and kind of unplanned in that way that people can live just about anywhere, but it's very centric around the chemical industry and the oil industry. I mean, that's the money that built those great big towers. Now, I understand now they're a little bit more into financial things and all that.
Houston is a huge city, right? It's the fourth largest in the country. So it's a fascinating place. It's one of the most diverse cities. It has really interesting arts going on. There is a huge financial sector. Petroleum, I would say, still drives the bus for the most part. Some of our more recent work has been focused on neighborhoods in Houston, some of which are historically black or dominant minority towns. And they're nestled right up against, a chemical plant or a fossil fuel refinery, which is seen as a real boon for those communities because it's a great source of jobs.
Sure.
These are high-paid,
Good-paying
technically
jobs.
Sophisticated work. And for generations, these communities have sort of, they've been willing to pay a price of some foul-smelling air sometimes and some lingering questions about higher levels of illness. But because of there's really not much recourse for them, they just live that way. And this is, I know for many people in the region, they're starting to ask more questions about this structure.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I noticed, first of all, 50 inches of rain is truly unprecedented. We know we have a national leader who says unprecedented about everything, but this is truly unprecedented to have that much rain. So people tend to go to, the models that they've done for climate change have said more and more storms and more severe storms. Well, 50 inches of rain is severe, and if you don't believe it, look at the video, from down there. And yet I noticed they don't even have everyone rescued yet. and you have certain talk radio hosts who are coming on saying, well, don't think this is climate change. This has nothing to do with climate change. And you just kind of wonder, because I keep waiting for this tipping point where enough people have suffered directly that they would question these people who say, oh, that's nothing to do with climate change.
Well, obviously, I mean, I think climate denial at this point in our history is extremely unethical. I mean, I think it's a really, it's untenable. Really, we need to really press anybody who remains questioning of the science around this, which is, you know, like all science, there are questions that surround it and about the severity and the timing and so forth, but climate science is settled science. What we see in places like Houston, the irony almost sort of knocks me over, right? That this is the petroleum corridor. We know that fossil fuels are the primary contributor to climate change, and then Houston is the place that catches this on the chin. Is sort of unbelievable. And it is, you're completely right, this is still going on down there. We should definitely not, you know, I'm troubled that a lot of people seem to be moving on and saying, well, you know.
Oh yeah, this is done.
Yeah, that was quite a week we had.
Get my FEMA check and we're out of here.
Yeah, but you know, the towns out east of Houston are still just terrible.
Even as we're taping right now.
Yeah, and we get a little bit of fatigue. This may come back to your earlier question about where our compassion goes. I think we do get fatigued and burned out, and we have to take care of ourselves when we deal with so much bad news. But it's definitely not going away. Both the crisis has not gone away, and then this story is going to continue for years, really.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things relating science to what you do as an independent producer, and basically independent production, as I see it, is journalism. Okay, in both, there is what I see as the scientific method. Okay, a scientist as a group or as an individual, it doesn't matter, do this work. They find out things. They're in search of the truth in one way or the other. Okay, so they use the methods that you use. You prove things. You don't do things with it. You don't make decisions without data. So you might start on one track, and then on the way you go, oh, you know what? The data doesn't tell me that my hypothesis is true. So what is the data telling me? The thing that makes that work is that it's open to peer review. So we don't take the information about climate change as a belief or as you know, this is someone's opinion, because anyone can look over the data. They can, if they want to, they can go out and collect their own data. Anyone can do this and have done that. You know, that's why you hear about this consensus of scientists that have built these models, and then we see them playing out. Well, I see journalism in the same light. If you do a documentary on something, people don't need to look at that one documentary and say, oh, my mind's made up. They can go look into the same things that you've looked into. And that, to me, that's going to become, when we do part 2 of this show, we're going to shift that theme to, we're living in a time when it's becoming difficult to find what is it that we believe, not as a belief in faith, but as a belief in what can be questioned, and how are people questioning the own information that they're putting out there. Because right now it looks like a hurricane, to excuse the pun, a hurricane of different things going on in that way.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, I think, in what you said here, but I agree that people should question science, actually, but I would say science wants to be questioned, right? Yeah. That is actually part of the process of science. Science is a process, and they do need to go out and sort of try to answer their own questions, see lots of not just films, but read the articles and talk to people in the know about these subjects and come to their own conclusion.
So that's where the education comes in, and that's where we're going to pick it up in part 2, is the whole education piece of this in the bigger sense. So thank you very much for being on part 1, Chistopher Lucas.
Well, thank you for having me.
Looking forward to starting up with part 2.
All right, thank you.
So thank you very much for watching. This is Adventures in Education, and we'll see you next time. I'm John Letts.